Bobby Delvecchio. How you doing today?
I am doing just fantastic. Thank you.
So we have a mutual friend, Bruce Marin, who's a PR guy to the stars, even going back to like Michael Landon and all these classic folks that we know. And he introduced us. And me and you actually have kind of a similar background. We both have a drum corps drumming background. Uh, but you've actually played with a whole long list of legends as a drummer and a touring drummer going way back when. And these days, you're a motivational speaker, but you could actually say you're an inspirational speaker, which I like. So tell me about you. So a Brooklyn boy, tell me how you got started with music and all that stuff.
Well, first of all, I want to point out, yeah, let's start with the music. So I started with music. I was a young kid when I met Dick Clark, and I was on the Dick Clark Caravan of Stars with Bobby Comstock. He was the leader of the band, and it was the greatest show. It was a 3 hour show, no intermissions. And I was a young kid, so I had energy galore. The 3 hours was nothing for me. But it was the likes of Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Bo Diddley, Jackie Wilson, Tina Turner, Ricky Nelson, The Temptations, the Dovells, the Shirelles, the
Oh
Coasters,
wow, yeah, all the legends.
all the legends. And and of course, I just loved it. I wasn't born when most of them had their hit records, but I listened to their record, put my spin on it. I never forget Chuck Berry saying, "Bobby, I want four on the floor." Just bass drum, boom, 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 boom. And I says, "Okay." And he goes louder. And I hit it so hard one day, the bass drum went flying past him into the audience.
Yeah, Chuck is a character. We worked with him when I was with Gary Buckley. We worked with him a couple of times, and he's a character.
The only thing that I regret, and it's there are no regrets in life, is that one day you and I are going to meet and we're going to jam together. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, I think it could happen. And we were talking the other day. So you even going back before your professional drumming career, you were a drum corps guy, and you were in the Garfield Cadets going back in the '60s.
Yeah,
So for
yeah,
people that don't know drum corps, it's a youth activity that's been going on for, I mean, we're going way back.
yeah. Well, I very first started with the Magnificent Yankees out of Utica, New York, and we actually beat Garfield in this what they call the CYO
Right.
championships in Boston, and it was Boston was there. We took top drums, and I like to say I had a little bit to do with that. We had a great drum line, a great teacher, Joe Wormworth. He ended up being a judge at some point too, and he taught Garfield, he taught Carolina Crown. He was just my mentor. He was great.
Yeah, and the drum corps thing, like, for both of us, if people don't know drum corps, like it was originally set up by the VFW, the Veterans of Foreign Wars,
That's right.
and to get basically to help kids get off the street and give them something positive to do and get some mentorship from usually at that point all male instructors pretty much. And
Yeah.
that was very influential for me. How was that for you as a young kid growing up?
Well, it was like my family. I mean, we would go do drum corps contest every week, and and we loved the music that we were playing. We had such a blast. We were literally like brothers. To this day,
Yeah, it's a fraternity. We were talking about that the other
yeah,
day.
that's a better word. I'm still friends with all the drum corps guys. And some have passed away, of course, but many of them. And so once a year, we get together for like a dinner and fellowship. Uh,
Awesome.
yeah, and it's just been great. I mean, I look forward to it. Have you drum corps, people that are not in drum corps, I heard it explained this way. Drum corps is like a sport, only harder.
Yeah, it's like a sport, but then you're running around with a drum or a horn or a flag or whatever. Yeah, and actually, all my instructors when I first started out with the Velvet Knights, they were all ex Kingsmen guys or former Kingsmen. So
Oh,
Tom
and
Float and all these guys are running around in California, Anaheim.
so
But
where do you live now?
I live in Las Vegas. I've been in Vegas since the late '80s, because like that, I'm a pro bass player, and I grew up playing with. Well, we know a lot of the same folks, but I grew up playing with in the same bands as like the guys from the Righteous Brothers, and I was playing with uh, Chuck Flores, who's Danny Rio, the Champs Tequila. That was my first pro gig. And those
That's
guys are all a lot older than me. Of course, I was 18 and they were like 60. But
in the next couple of months, I'm going to be in Vegas. So I would love to invite you and Bruce. We'll all go out for a nice lunch somewhere. And I'm sure we got a lot of stories to tell.
oh yeah, yeah. Bruce is our friend Bruce, the PR manager. He goes way back. His mother actually was owned the first female owned PR company in Hollywood going back in the 50s.
No
So
kidding.
yeah,
Wow.
so it's a really interesting history with him, his whole family. So tell me about, okay, so you did that. You grew up and you're playing drum corps. You start playing, probably just start doing gigs on drum set. How did you make that transition to playing with Dick Clark and those guys?
I made that when I was going to college, Ithaca College, and I met Bobby Comstock. And Bobby was the orchestra leader, and he was I was recommended to him. I auditioned, and he says, "Oh my God," he says, "You're a monster drummer." He says, "Where'd you get those chops from?" I said, "Drum corps." Because, like I said, paradiddles, double paradiddles, all of that, I would do between my right foot and my left hand. Somebody said to me, "How did you go from drumming to the franchise business?" And I says, "It's simple. It was called drumming up business, right?"
Exactly. Yeah.
Well,
Well, it all connects too because it's all creative, anyways, right?
it is. You know what? Music to me, I told my son just had a baby girl, 1 year old. My daughter just had a baby boy, 1 month old. And I said, you have to teach them music. And I'll tell you why I say that. Be two reasons. One, music really develops the right brain. So my son's an engineer. He's one of the top engineers at Metaverse. And
Oh, awesome.
his boss said, he's the most creative engineer we've ever had here. Where's he get it from? I says, he's a drummer. And then he was the New York State karate champion at 10 years old. And they says, oh, I can't tell if your son is right-handed, left-handed, right-footed, or left-footed. I says, he's a drummer. And so
Yeah, you
he,
got to use all parts of your brain to make that work, right?
so yeah, as an intern, he worked over at Lockheed. And he says, Dad, I'm going to MIT with the president of Lockheed and a four-star general. And I says, really? He says, yeah, we're going to pitch the students at MIT to come and work at Lockheed. And I says, that's great. He goes, yeah. And I'm giving the presentation. I says, really? He says, yeah. My boss in the four-star general says, we can't relate to these millennials, but you can. And then recruited a ton out of there. So that's that sentiment. My daughter happens to be a worship leader and the youth pastor for 900 teenage girls.
Oh, wow.
And he says, my God, Dara, the pastor said, you are, and this is a big church, 50,000 people in Dallas. She said, he said to her, Dara, you're so talented, but you're so creative. And she says, that's because I'm a singer. I started both my son and my daughter at 2 years old in the music business. So now I turned to my daughter and my son and I said, of course, my grandchildren are going to play instruments, right? Because that got you really far in life. In
Yeah, and unlocking that creative part of your brain, but then also learning just how to focus. Because most kids these days they have a 30-second focus span, if that, right? But learning a musical instrument or learning how to perform, you've got to really be able to lock in, right?
it's all about focus. It's all about, in drum corps, it's all about discipline.
Right.
I mean, we had to practice, and if we didn't practice, the instructor knew it. Maybe the audience didn't, but the instructor knew it. And I remember one time I had my finger out like this. I'm holding my drumstick,
Right.
and he smacked it with his drumstick, and it blew up 3 times the size. And he says, "I'll bet you'll never do that again."
Yeah, that's the old school like guys.
It's cool. And you know
That's
what?
the Bridgman guys. It was funny.
They learn lessons like that. Yeah, the
Oh
Bridge,
yeah.
another great drum corps. And of course, out in California, you got the Blue Devils. And I look at them today and I watch what they're doing and I go, my God, they're like machines. But
Yeah.
so is AI. And my instructor said to me, Bobby, when you were playing, nobody could play what you guys were playing. So he goes, it's just evolution. They get to a point and all of a sudden it's experimenting with new and more difficult rhythm.
Yeah, and different gear, and I mean that's true. Actually, I mean, like obviously, drum corps is not an industry really, but it kind of is. But it's true of any industry. Like innovation is always happening, and you kind of have to like innovate yourself to keep up, right? Otherwise, you get left behind.
You know, there's a great article, look it up, or I'll send it to you, from Harvard Magazine, Harvard Review.
Mhm.
And they did a study and they said the smartest people in the world are drummers. And here's how they backed it up. They says they did probes and they did all the mental and
Right,
things that have to do with the brain. And they says it's every neuron in your brain is firing when you're drumming. Now, music in general is a catalyst and it makes you smarter. But drumming, something about drumming, they says, so what I did, you'll get a kick out of this. I decided I wanted to give back. So I was praying one day and I says, God, what can I do? How can I help other people? And he says, just use the talents I gave you. I says, give me a break. I'm a rock and roll drummer. This is what I put in my spirit. Well, then go teach people how to drum. And what came to my mind is kids that are beating cancer. So I went to a
right.
local hospital. I've now taught over 1,000 cancer children how to beat cancer. They go to chemo and radiation with drumsticks. Doc,
Yeah, and I saw that about your background. So tell me about how that actually came about. Like, how did you put that together? Is that it's a foundation or
yeah, so I was working for a group called Kids Beating Cancer out of the Advent Hospital in Orlando, and then eventually went on because I thought, geez, who needs stress relief? Who's suffering from PTSD? And of
right?
course, veterans are, prisoners are, the kids are, and I went from teaching cancer kids to autistic kids to sickle cell disease. So it's really beating the odds.
Right.
Everybody who's beating the odds. And so it became a passion of mine. I mean, they pay me money to go do that. I endorse the checks right back to the kids and the families.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. I've done great things in my life. I would say this is the greatest because when you give back, um, my pastor said to me once, Bobby, you don't get to give, you give. You don't give to get, you get to give.
Right. Yeah. And if you're lucky enough to make a living doing the stuff that we've done, you definitely you have to pay back. Otherwise, it's good karma, if nothing else, right?
Absolutely 100%. And I love the kids and to see the smiles on their face. One little boy, 4 years old, was getting his port put in his side for
Right.
feeding, and he was screaming. And I was outside the door. I walked in, it was like flipping a light switch. He looked up with a big smile and he goes, Mr. Bob, are you coming here to play drums with me? And I says, you bet I am. And
Yeah.
the parents and the doctor says, I don't know. Who do you think you are, Patch Adams? I mean,
Yeah.
these kids just love it when you show up, and
Yeah.
I loved it as well.
Well, kids and music go hand in hand, and it's a great thing. Like I said, having the discipline, learning focus, that just helps you throughout your entire life. It's really helped me for sure achieve whatever things I've achieved. It's just
Yeah.
learning how to get stuff done. That's an important life skill, no matter if you're
Well,
playing music or if you're in business or whatever it is, right?
well, it's funny. You get into the business to make money, and I made no money, but I had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And then I got out of the business because I was making a ton of money, but I wasn't having fun anymore.
Right. So then you got to figure out, okay, how can I make these things work together?
So, so that's where I made a switch into franchising because franchising is all about helping people attain the American dream. And I'm good at that because I could paint pictures for people. I remember the first time I met Zig Ziglar. He
Hmm.
was my mentor, 5 years.
Oh,
And
okay.
Zig, and he says, so Bobby, you're a salesman. And I says, no, Zig, actually, I'm a rock drummer. And he says, like I said, you're a salesman. I says, Zig, I wouldn't know how to sell you something if you wanted it. He says, do you know what the definition of a drummer is? I go, yeah, a guy who beats the drum. He says, that's the first definition. Look it up in Webster's dictionary. The second definition is a traveling salesman. I says,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
back in the early days, they'd beat the pots and pans. People would come running and buy the goods. He said they called that drumming up business. And I says, okay. And I trademarked it right then and there.
Yeah. Well, that's something I grew up in, like I mentioned, Los Angeles, playing in the clubs and doing that kind of thing. This is like in the early '80s, mid 80s. And you learn really quickly that you've got to learn how to market yourself. You've got to learn how to make connections, how to meet people, be authentic if you want to, to have lasting connections. And
Sure.
those life skills, they carry, like you mentioned, they carry out throughout any business or anything, any adventure that you do. Just learning those skills are super important. Has that really, that's really probably what helped you, right?
Now, 100%. I tell people selling is all about building relationships. I was selling solar energy back in the 80s, and the president of the solar company came out. He says, "Can I write on your presentation with you?" He goes, "I can't believe how many deals you're writing a month." And I said, "Sure." So we do the presentation. We get in the car and he looks at me and he goes, "Bobby, that was the worst presentation I've ever seen in my life." And I looked at him and I says, "Really? Why do you say that?" And he says, "Because you spent 45 minutes talking about pizza, Italian food, your kids, the music business, and 15 minutes on the presentation." And I says, "Well, what was the outcome?" He says, "Well, you sold it." He goes, "Oh."
Yeah. Well, that's it, right?
So if people like you, they'll trust you. If they
Yeah.
trust from you, they'll buy from you.
Yeah, that's something. I mean, like I said, it all connects back to music, but it connects to life in general. Like a lot of that is just building trust, telling your story, telling the story of the product, which sometimes is you as a musician. You are the product, and also being authentic. Do you think authenticity is a big key point to that?
I would say it's probably the most important part of it. People could tell if you're exaggerating, people could tell if you're lying. But my dad had the best expression. He said, "Bobby, a man can lie with his mouth, but not with his eyes."
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And
You
he
always look at the eyes.
Well, I do. So
Yep.
you say good eye contact is the key, good handshake, all the things, all the body language things were just so important.
Yeah.
Watch people's pupils in their eyes. And, you know, the simplest thing, I had people say to me, "Well, I don't know if I could do it right now." And I says, listen, I respect that and I can appreciate it. But if you were to do it, why would you do it? And he'd give me a list of two or three things. I'd look at his wife. She'd give me three or four more. And at the end, I would say, "So in other words, all those things you want, you're not going to get if you don't do this. Isn't that correct?" And he goes, "Yeah." I says, "Don't you think it's time to make the right decision in your life?" He goes, "Absolutely." And I reach out and shake their hand. I never asked them if they wanted the product or they
Right.
don't. I never asked them that. I just simply, as Zig would say, don't sell the people, tell the people.
Yeah, and ultimately, you're really selling yourself. The product is a secondary thing almost. 'Cause if they don't believe you and they don't trust you, then they're not going to buy anyways, right?
I totally agree with you. Even in the franchising business, when I talk about the bands I played with, they feel like they know you
Right.
right there. "Oh, I saw you in Virginia Beach in 1972." "Yeah, that was me." And they go, "Oh, wow, that's great. Could I take a picture with you?" It's so funny how many people take pictures.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a potential client for us. So when you treat them with respect, and you hit it right on the head earlier, you said it's like telling good stories. My God, I have so many stories. When I meet you, I'm going to give you an autographed copy of my book. There's so many great stories in there. One of them that I'll tell you, I have a phrase, one to beat. I'm the one to beat. People would say, "Well, Bobby, were you the best drummer?" I don't know if I was the best. "Were you number one?" I don't know about that, but I could tell you this. I was the one to beat. And
Right.
ONE, the number two, and then beat. And they says, "Where did you get that from?" I says, "Well, when I was 5 years old, living in Rome, New York, they had snowbanks. They get a lot of snow in upstate New York. And it was maybe 5 feet tall, but we thought it was Mount Everest. And the game we played is the guy on top had to be knocked off. He wasn't the best. He was the one to beat."
Right.
So that's where they came from.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And it's funny too. Going back to music, I remember I people were talking about like sight reading, reading music, and my thing I've always said is just don't be the guy they have to stop for. Don't be that guy. So you don't have to be the best, but you just have to be where you can get the job done. And that oftentimes in life we find out like that's the thing. And also sometimes it's just about showing up and being present in the moment, right?
Well, you have to be present. I'll give you another story about that. It's in my first chapter called The Beat. It's called The Show Must Go On. And so I was coming back from a drum corps practice, And the car I was in got sideswiped. It was the wintertime, slid all over the road, went down the
Right.
embankments, crushed my shoulder. I laid in the snow for hours waiting for the ambulance to come. And that night I had to play a concert with my band. And I had one arm, my left clavicle was broken, one arm in a sling, and I could only play with one hand. I played the whole show, never missing a beat, because I had a foot. I
Right.
had three limbs left, so I could do that, and I did. And I tell people that's the show must go on, no matter what the circumstances, what the obstacles are, what gets in your way, the show has to go on, right?
Right. Yeah. And that mentality that works, like I said, it's a lot of that stuff. It works in music, but it works in life. It's not just a music thing, right?
Well, you hear there's no business like show business, right? And so I took that literally. Sometimes I reflect back to music or entertainment, and there's no business like show business. When you come to see our booth in the franchise show, it looks like a show. Everybody stops. They're mesmerized because I say, there's no business without show business. You have to.
Right.
I remember Tad's Steakhouse in New York City. The meat was the worst meat ever, but in the window there were flames flying and that meat was sizzling, and that's where they got, the sizzle instead of the steak. You got to sell the sizzle.
Right.
Well, I sell the sizzle, but not to mislead it, the sizzle can't be fake. It's got to be authentic and it's got to be real. So
Yeah. You got to be able to back it up, right?
absolutely.
So how did you? So I know that you're really big in the franchising world, and how did you make the transition into that business?
A friend of mine said, I had just switched over from drumming. Um, I tell people the drumming music business was like Babylon. A lot of crazy things went on.
Oh yeah, of course.
So I retired. I had my daughter, and I says, I'm not going to go on the road anymore. I got to spend time with her now, which I did. But I says, I don't know what business I'm going to get in. I don't know how to do anything else. My dad was a contractor. My brother knew contracting work. Uh,
Right.
I tell people, I have a right and left-handed screwdriver, and I'll drum with that sometime. So I'm not a technician by any means. And somebody says, you know what, Bobby, you should get into the franchise business. It's all about building relationships. And I says, I know how to do that. They says, okay. So I got into the business. I was mentored. Believe it or not, the first business I got into was Dale Carnegie Training.
Oh yeah, well that was a big one.
Yeah, I met them. I didn't know how to sell franchises, but I gave it a good shot. I knew how to build relationships with people, and I sold over 200 franchises for them. So,
Wow.
so they, and that got my start in franchising. And I worked for. Here's an interesting note. I worked for Bono from
Oh
U2.
yeah, I saw that. Right, you too. Yeah.
Yeah, they had a franchise called Qzar. It was a laser tag arcade. We had a bunch of them in Dallas, Texas, all over the country, all over the world. I sold 500 of them for $1 million each. And
Wow.
got my feet wet, really,
Yeah.
in franchising.
Yeah. I mean the thing is like, you have like we were talking about going back to the music thing. You really learn quickly in the music business that you have to be able to sell yourself and you have to be able to be authentic. And have you found like those are key things that have made you successful over the years?
Yeah, you have to have the chops to back it up, like you said. But yeah, if people don't like you or you don't have the personality, um, I don't know if you could tell or not, I'm a really shy type of person.
Yeah, me too.
The only one talking on an elevator. What are you talking about? Right. So I'm an outgoing person. So was my mom. So was my dad. They just taught us to be real people, you
Yeah.
know. And when you grow up in that Italian family like that, you learn respect, you learn discipline, and you definitely learn how to cook.
Oh yeah. Well, I used to work. I don't know if I think I told you that I used to work with Frankie Avalon. I worked with Frankie for many years,
Yeah,
and
what a
and I learned a lot from him because Frankie is a big family man. He has eight of his own kids. He came from a large Italian family, and he's been working since he was a kid. And I really learned a lot from him about, how to act and just respect and the importance of family and building and focusing on that. And have you found like that's been an important part of you? Because you mentioned your kids, that's been a really important part of your success too, right?
I'll tell you, I'll rank them in these orders. God is first, then my family, then my friends. After that, nothing else really matters.
Right. Yeah. And your health, that's important.
Health, of course, but that's all due to God.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. We don't have a lot of control over that, but some, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh,
Uh,
it's been great because my faith is so strong, and I've instilled that in my children as well. They're well grounded. The Bible will say, "Raise up a child in the way they will go, and they won't depart." Well, I just set the stage for them. I
yeah.
put them to Christian school and all of that, and then all of a sudden, um, I says, "Okay, it's time to fly now." And,
Yeah.
and they did, and they've made tremendous successes out of their life and their
Yeah,
career.
I mean, I think that's, as a parent, like that, like you say, you give them a good bringing upbringing, a good set of morals and beliefs, and then they're going to do well in the world. They if they have that kind of foundation. Unfortunately, these days, a lot of kids don't have that, and that some of the social issues that we have in society, I think we kind of, to me, I've always believed that that's been a big part of that is a lack of like a dad being around or that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Like somebody said once, anybody could be a father, but not everybody could be a dad.
That's exactly right.
You
Yeah.
know, I said to my son, I says, Sean, you're an incredible father. And he says, Dad, look who my mentor was.
Yeah, that's good. You know what? So they're so fortunate in that respect for sure. What's some advice that you would give young people, not just musicians, but just young people starting out in the world trying to figure all this out?
I would say the first thing is, um, I have so many stories. So here's another quick one. We're going on vacation to Cancun with my family, and we're getting ready to board. And I said to my son and my daughter, go to the newsstand and pick out some magazines so you can read on the way. My son was 4, my daughter was 8. My son came back with Popular Mechanics and Popular Science. And I said, Sean, do you even know what this is? He goes, no, but I find it really interesting. Fast forward 20 years, and he's an engineer. My daughter gets Billboard magazine, 17 magazine, and Tiger Beat. And she comes back. She's a musician and a fashion stylist today.
Right.
So if I was going to give advice, I would say definitely, people say follow your dreams, follow your passion. If you follow your passion, you'll never work a day in your life. So follow your passion, number one. Number two, be razor focused. Number three, be disciplined in what you do. Do it until you could do it. When I was teaching my salespeople, remember the old days where they had the flip charts?
Yeah. Yeah.
I says, I want you to do it backwards. They says, why? We'll never do it backwards. I says, no, but if you could do it backwards, I'll know that you know it frontwards. And I trained them like that, and became really good. By my theory being, if you know it frontwards and backwards, you don't have to look at the page when you're flipping it. You just
Right.
And people love that eye contact too, and it makes it more real.
Yeah,
So
and to really internalizing it, not just have it just sit there and stare at your notes. And
yeah, and I would also say, uh, get a role model, a good role model. And the role model is not when I was growing up, Elvis Presley, James Dean,
right.
but look what happened to them. So I had the wrong role models. So I started looking, who's the smartest person I ever met in my life? My mom. When just before she died, I said, Mom, I've got this great plan, this new business plan, and it's going to be fantastic. And if it doesn't work, I've got plan B. And she goes, Well, why do you have plan B? And I said, In case plan A doesn't work. She goes, Why don't you have a plan A plus? I says, What? She goes, Yeah, you got a great plan, but if it doesn't work, you got a better one.
Yeah.
I said, Did you actually say that? So my mom is my role model. My drum instructor, of course, was my role model. Dad was a great role model. He would get the shirt off his back to anyone at all. And my children are my role models. I watched how they grew up and what they did and how they're so not only disciplined, but friendly to everybody.
Mm.
Everybody loves my kids. And my kids would say, but Dad, everybody loved you. From everybody at church to at work, wherever you went, you were just a nice guy. And
Yeah.
well, I like to say I'm a good guy, but I'm a bad boy.
Yeah. Yeah. I always say be nice till you can't be nice. It's actually funny. I had a friend of mine. I did a session here a long time ago. There was a really accomplished guitar player that came to Vegas, and he called me to come over to his house and record a bass for a track. And he goes, it's really funny. He goes, I asked everybody in town about you, and everybody likes you. And I said, well, that's good. I know it's not always the case, but
If I could switch gears for a second, you could see behind me that poster, Drumming Up Business. My
sure.
new book just came out. I want to get you an autographed copy when we meet in Vegas. And I would tell people, read the book. There's
Mm,
great stories in there, but there's great, what do they call them? Golden nuggets,
yeah.
tidbits. I call them drum tips.
There you go. And actually, so on that subject, so tell people how they can find you online. I think you have a website and that stuff,
Yeah,
right?
drummingupbusiness.com is the easiest way. I'm also on Amazon, of course. Um, but that if they get in contact with me, listen, I'm a giver, not a taker. I've had several people reach out to me and say, Bob, I had a hard time getting your book. I says, give me your address and I'll send you an autographed copy.
Mhm.
And so my publisher says, Bobby, you could be selling these books. I says, I'm selling me, not the.
Right.
And those people will remember that. So there's so many great drum tips in that book that people will read it at the very end of each chapter and they'll get it because it's not just about stories make you real, but the instruction that you give them, the programs and the systems that you give them is what's going to really make them better. They're not going to use my stories. I tell them, come up with your own stories. You know, a guy said to me once, but Bobby, you don't know what I've been through. I was bullied. My parents used to beat me. And I says, you know what? I don't know what happened in your life, but let me tell you what happened to me. I had polio, I had pneumonia, I had cancer. I jumped out of a burning building and I went through a divorce. I'd say I had a few obstacles in my life. And I say that's beating the odds, but this is how to recover from
Right.
wipeout.
Yeah,
Wipeout.
and you know what? And what you learn, and as you know, I'm going to be 60 here in April, and what you learn is that everybody's got a story, and it's not about the story; it's about what you do with it, how you pick yourself up and keep moving, right?
Yeah, Rocky used to say that. It's not about how hard you get hit, but how hard you get hit and still get back up.
And that's you know what? That's exactly right. That's very true. Hey, thank you so much, Bobby, for sharing your story. And I know we could go on for hours because we have a lot of mutual friends too.
We'll do that when we meet for sure.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll get a good selfie, and maybe we'll send a shout out video to everybody that's checking out the podcast. But thank you so much for taking the time to chat, and it's great learning about you.
Oh, thank you. And same here.
Awesome. Okay, cool. I'll see you when you come to Vegas.
All right. Have a blessed day.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Bobby.